NUS fingers glide across the glass. Cold glass. A blank screen. You're awake, but your eyes aren't open yet. Only your hand reaches out, automatically, as if searching for the world's pulse. Instead, it finds other faces, other lives, other laughter. Your screen glows, but inside, there's silence. Thick, sticky, like old tape on a package. You are not alone. More than 61% of young Americans feel the same way. That's a CDC statistic. Higher than depression. Higher than anxiety. Loneliness isn't a luxury. It's not a whim. It's an epidemic. And you're not broken. You're just plugged in incorrectly. Imagine this. You're in a crowded subway. 100 bodies around you. 1,000 voices. And not a single one for you. Does that happen? Yes, it does. Because loneliness isn't about an empty room. It's about empty connection. You scroll, you like, you comment. But your brain doesn't believe it. It's waiting for a real glance, a real I see you. And it gets pixels. Studies are clear. 2 hours on social media a day and you're 3 times more likely to feel cut off from the world. Why? Because passive scrolling is like eating plastic food. It looks like food. It smells like food. But it doesn't nourish you. Your default mode network, the one that activates when you're alone, it doesn't rest. It ruminates. It cycles through the same thoughts, like a scratched vinyl record. But here's the paradox. In silence, there's no threat. In silence, there's a signal, ancient, like hunger, like thirst. Your brain isn't screaming help. It's whispering, return. Return to yourself. Not to the idealized me from your stories, but to the real you. The one who breathes, makes mistakes, gets tired. The Stoics knew this. Every morning, they sat in silence, faced their fears, didn't run, didn't numb them, looked them in the eye, and stripped them of their power. What about you? Try it now. Put your phone down. Watch the steam rise from your tea. Listen to your heartbeat. Not as background noise, but as music. This isn't an escape. It's an entrance. Inward. To a place where loneliness stops being an enemy and becomes a door. Your brain isn't lying. It's screaming. Image, fMRI scan. A bright red spot deep in the skull, pulsating like a warning. This isn't a metaphor. It's the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex. The area that lights up when you burn your hand on the stove, or when you get dumped, or when you sit all day and no one notices you're gone. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett points at the screen. This is where loneliness lives, in the same neural circuit as physical pain. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a broken heart and an unanswered message. To it, it's the same, a distress signal. Why? Because 100,000 years ago, loneliness equaled death. You alone on the savannah meant you were dinner for a lion. Your brain didn't wait for you to think about it. It triggered an alarm, not with words, with pain, to make you run back to the fire, to the voices, to the hands. This system is still inside you. Even when you're in Brooklyn, even when you have 5,000 followers. And here's the paradox. The more you avoid loneliness, the more intensely it burns. Modern scans show that with chronic isolation, neural pain doesn't subside. It escalates. Like pus in a wound, like inflammation. And this isn't poetry. It's statistics. Loneliness increases the risk of heart attack by 29% and mortality by 26%. These numbers are from perspectives on psychological science, not from a blog, from science. Your body is breaking down, not from sadness, from physiology. But then why don't monks, writers, artists, those who spend years in silence, die? Because they're not alone. They are solitary by choice. The difference isn't in biology, it's in context. Your brain isn't afraid of silence, it's afraid of rejection. And modern culture has turned solitude into a sign of failure. You're not trending. You're not needed. You're superfluous. And you believe it. You grab your phone, you scroll. You chase likes like beggars chase coins. But it's not food. It's a substitute. And your brain knows it. Try it now. Close your eyes. Imagine you're sitting in a room. No one is calling. No one is waiting. And you're not panicking. You just are. You breathe. You feel the weight of your body in the chair, the warmth in your palms. This isn't an escape. It's a reboot. Because loneliness isn't an enemy. It's a sensor, like a toothache. It doesn't say, you're broken. It says, pay attention. And if you stop fearing this signal, it will stop being pain. It will become a compass. Imagine you're 28. You live in New York. You have a job, an apartment, even a couple of close friends. But you don't go to every party. You don't reply to every message instantly. Sometimes you just want to stay home, with a book, with silence, with yourself. And then a colleague says with a slight smirk, still alone, not looking for anyone. Or a friend whispers, you've become so withdrawn. Are you okay? You feel like you're being perceived as strange, as if solitude is a sign of failure, not a choice. The air in the room becomes thick, like damp concrete. You start to doubt, maybe they're right. This isn't accidental. In American culture, success has long been associated with visibility, being seen, being at the center, being connected. From school group projects to corporate networking events, the system encourages constant interaction. Solitude, however, is labeled as a deviation, as an inability to fit in. And so, even when we are physically alone, we feel guilty. We think, if I'm not with someone, then I'm not good enough. But this isn't the truth. It's a cultural myth. And it prevents us from seeing that solitude can be an act of strength, not weakness. In Scandinavian countries, on the contrary, the practice of friluftsliv, life outdoors in solitude, is considered a sign of maturity, not strangeness. Here's a striking contrast. In Japan, there's the phenomenon of hikikomori, people who voluntarily withdraw from society for months or even years. And while this causes concern, society doesn't immediately label them as sick. It's viewed as a cultural phenomenon, sometimes even as a form of protest or internal search. But in the West, the same person gets a diagnosis, social anxiety, depression, avoidant personality disorder. Neurobiologically, however, it can be the very same attempt to recover, the very same survival strategy. It's just that in one culture it's understood, in another it's condemned. Ethnographic studies show that in 40% of cases, hikikomori is not a pathology, but an adaptive response to an overload of social expectations. And this is where it leads us. When solitude is stigmatized, we don't just fear being alone. We begin to hate ourselves in solitude. Because inside us, a voice switches on. A critic, a judge, an executioner. It says, "No one needs you. You're not interesting enough. You made a mistake. You lost." And it is this internal dialogue that turns solitude into a prison. But what if this voice could be changed? What if instead of criticism, it started saying, "I'm here. I'm with you. Stop. Right now. Remember the last time you were alone and didn't feel shame. Where were you? What did you hear? What did you feel in your chest? Remember that feeling. It is your compass, not a disease, not a weakness, but a quiet, precise strength. 3 a.m. You're not sleeping. Your mind is a cinema of your failures. That phrase in the meeting, that silence in the chat, that glance you didn't catch. Thoughts circle like files stuck in a buffer. You try to close the tab, but your mind has no X button, only an inner voice, growing louder. You're not good enough, and you never will be. A lump in your throat, your pulse in your ears. This isn't insomnia. It's rumination. Your brain, trapped in a cycle of self-flagellation like a laptop with a frozen YouTube tab, heating up, buzzing, but not shutting down. This isn't weakness. It's a neuropsychological trap. When you're alone, your brain activates the default mode network, the very one responsible for self-reflection. Imagine, it's like a background tab that eats up memory even when you're not looking. And if inside it is a critic, not a friend, then solitude turns into torture. fMRI scans don't lie. In people with chronic rumination, this area glows like an overheated processor, even at rest. But here's a surprising discovery. Solitude can be medicine. In one experiment, participants were sent for a walk, alone, without a phone. Another group was allowed to scroll through their feed. The result? In the first group, activity in the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, the rumination zone, dropped by 27%, simply from silence, simply from the absence of digital noise. Clinical data confirms 20 minutes of solitary silence a day reduces rumination by 19% in just 1 week. It's all about intention. If you find yourself alone out of fear, silence will become an echo of your fears. But if you choose solitude consciously, as a ritual, as a pause, it becomes a space where the inner critic falls silent and begins to listen. Stop. Right now. Imagine you're sitting in a room. No one is calling. No one is waiting. And you're not thinking about needing to be better. You just breathe. Feel the weight of your body, the warmth in your palms. In this moment, there is strength, not in escape, not in noise, but in staying and telling yourself, I am here. I am with you. This isn't meditation. It's a hack. You're reprogramming your inner voice from a judge to an ally. And then loneliness stops being a trap. It becomes a tool. Dawn in Rome. The streets are empty. Only a crow caws on the tiles. Mark sits by the window, eyes closed, breathing steady. In his mind, he sees his house on fire, his name in the dirt, his body on the brink of death. He doesn't tremble. He doesn't pray. He just watches. This is premeditatio malorum, a Stoic exercise. Imagine the worst. Live through it, and it will cease to be frightening. In the silence, he doesn't seek approval, doesn't chase glances. He trains his autonomy, like a sword on a whetstone. And you wake up and grab your phone. Before opening your eyes, before taking a breath, you seek solace in pixels. But Mark knew, strength isn't in being seen, it's in being whole, even when no one is watching. And here's the connection across 2,000 years. The modern brain is the same, only instead of Roman streets, it's an Instagram feed. Instead of a tribunal, it's stories. But the neurobiology hasn't changed. When you consciously choose solitude, even 15 minutes in the morning without a screen, you lower your cortisol levels, the hormone that tears you apart from the inside, like rust on metal. Longitudinal studies are clear. People who practice morning silence are 34% less likely to burn out, not because they are calm, but because they don't surrender control. Image. An alarm clock rings. A hand reaches, not for the phone, but for a glass of water. And now, the paradox. The Japanese call it ma, the space between sounds. Scandinavians call it friluftsliv, a walk in the woods alone, without a goal. Buddhists call it siddhartha, to sit and observe. They all do one thing, create a gap between stimulus and reaction. You see a notification and you don't click. You feel anxiety and you don't chase likes. You just remain. And in that gap, freedom is born. Research confirms, after a 5-day digital detox, creativity increases by 42%. Not because you rested, but because the brain finally stopped being a browser with 50 tabs open. It became a tool, sharp, precise, like Mark's. But silence only works if you're not your own enemy. If deep down you're still hissing, you won't achieve anything. You're alone because you're unworthy. Then solitude will become torture. So the task isn't to be silent. It's to change the voice. Try it now. Next time you're alone, don't turn on music. Don't open your phone. Just say aloud, I'm here, and I'm with you. Not as a mantra, but as a covenant. This isn't meditation. It's a rebellion against a culture that teaches to be alone means to be nobody. But in reality, to be alone means to be whole. Imagine you're Mark, 32 years old, in Chicago. 700 friends in your feed. But every morning, an hour before the alarm, in the dim light, the same voice. You're falling behind. You're not like the others. Before, you'd grab your phone, drowning the silence with notifications. But one day, you didn't. You just lay there, felt the cold of the sheets, the pressure of silence on your temples, and suddenly you heard not just the criticism, but the fatigue beneath it, deep, like a crack in the ice. Then you quietly asked, if my best friend felt the same way, what would I tell him? The answer came instantly, softly, like a sigh. You're doing the best you can. And you? What would you tell yourself if you were your own friend? Internal dialogue isn't just thoughts. It's a neural network, alive. It either supports or destroys. Self-criticism is like an internal overseer. It demands, compares, punishes. It was born to keep you from being cast out of the tribe. But in solitude it goes mad, starts screaming, and you listen, over and over. This is rumination, like a frozen browser tab, eating memory, overheating the processor, preventing shutdown. Research from the Journal of Abnormal Psychology is clear. Such an internal mode increases the risk of depression by 37%. Now, the contrast. Self-compassion doesn't say, you're great. It says, you're human. And this isn't weakness. It's psychological flexibility. Dr. Kristin Neff has shown a brain that isn't at war with itself heals wounds faster, doesn't waste energy on internal conflict. It's free. And here's the paradox. Self-compassion makes you stronger than self-esteem. Yes. You heard that right. A 12-year study from the University of Michigan, 10,000 lives, showed those who tell themselves, I'm still worthy of care, even if I made a mistake, are 40% more resilient to stress and 28% less likely to burn out. Why? Because self-esteem is like a battery. It drains when you fall. But self-compassion is like a solar panel. It works even in the shade. Try it now. Next time the inner voice hisses, you won't achieve anything. Stop. Ask, if this were my friend, would I speak to them like that? And then a breakthrough will happen. When the critic falls silent, what opens up isn't emptiness, it's space. Space where the mind begins to wander, like in childhood, without purpose, without likes. Just thinking. This is the default mode network, the very one that provides insights, ideas, epiphanies, and it only activates when you stop criticizing yourself. Research from Harvard's mindfulness lab confirms after just 15 minutes of non-mediated solitude, this inner light begins to shine brighter. You're not losing connection. You're finding yourself. 5 people, 5 days, no screens, in a cabin in Vermont, only the crackling of wood and the rustling of pines. The first 48 hours, hands trembled, hearts pounded as if running from something. One participant, David, caught himself typing a code in the air, fingers moving automatically. Emily, a teacher, stared out the window for hours, as if waiting for a notification from the clouds. It was withdrawal, not from coffee, not from sugar, from notifications. But by the 3rd day, the silence stopped being an enemy. David scribbled the architecture of an app he'd been struggling with for 2 years on a napkin. The idea didn't come from effort, but when he simply watched the steam rise from his cup. Emily wrote a poem, for the first time in 15 years. The words weren't invented. They fell onto the paper like snow on a branch. And you? When was the last time your mind wandered, without purpose, without likes, without the fear of being unproductive. This isn't magic. It's neurobiology. When you turn off the external noise, the brain's default mode network activates. Imagine, it's like a background tab where the brain connects old memories with new images and suddenly sees what was previously hidden. This is how insights are born, not in the office, not in a chat, but in silence, when you stop being a browser with 50 tabs and become a tool. And here are the numbers that sound like a miracle. After 5 days without screens, participants' cortisol levels dropped by 28%, and creativity, according to the Torrance test, increased by 50%. Not 10, not 20, 50. This isn't rest. It's a reboot, like a hard reset on an overheated laptop. Physicist Richard Feynman once said, "I solved the most difficult problems by just looking at a tree." He wasn't meditating. He wasn't looking for inspiration. He was simply allowing his mind to breathe. And now, the main point. When they returned to the city, they didn't become hermits. They became more precise, clearer. Their ideas, sharp as a razor. But even more importantly, there was no longer emptiness inside them. Something like an inner community had appeared there, quiet, reliable, one that doesn't say, "You must," but "I am with you." And this is the key. Because true connections with others don't start with likes, but with one condition. You are no longer afraid to be alone with yourself. CDC data confirms this skill reduces the risk of chronic loneliness by 61% in those aged 18 to 25. Try tomorrow. 15 minutes. No phone. No goal. Just sit. Watch the steam from your tea and let your mind wander. Silence isn't emptiness. It's fertile ground, and in it, what will change your life is already growing. Morning. In Brooklyn. Sarah doesn't grab her phone. She sits by the window. The cup in her hands is warm. Steam rises like a quiet question. Below, a stream of people. Everyone rushing somewhere. No one looks up. Before she feared these 10 minutes, feared that in the silence, a voice would speak, "You're not good enough." But now, she doesn't flinch, doesn't turn on music, doesn't scroll through her feed. She simply says, "I'm here. I hear you, but I no longer believe you unconditionally." And in that moment, not emptiness, but presence. As if a small community awakens within her, not loud, not demanding, just there, like a lighthouse in the fog. And you? When was the last time you answered yourself instead of running away? An inner community isn't poetry. It's a skill, like brewing coffee or tying shoelaces. It's built through regular solitude, through refusing to chase approval like Pokemon. Psychologists call it internal autonomy, the ability to decide what's important to you without asking your stories. And it doesn't make you a hermit. On the contrary. When you don't seek validation of your worth from others, your relationships become honest. You choose people not out of fear of being alone, but because you can breathe easily with them. Image, fMRI scan. Amygdala, a dim spot, barely glowing. People who know how to sit with themselves in a room are 63% less likely to experience social anxiety, even even when no one is around. Why? Because their brain no longer confuses loneliness with danger. For it's not a distress signal. It's a break, like the silence between notes. And in that silence, clarity is born. Try tomorrow. Wake up 5 minutes earlier. Don't touch your screen. Just watch the steam rise from your cup. And if the critic speaks inside, don't chase it away. Ask, what are you afraid of? Here's the hack. An inner community doesn't require meditation or mantras. It requires one thing: to stop being your own enemy, and then loneliness stops being a trap. It becomes a home. You are already home. You just forgot to knock. Everything we've covered isn't a set of advice. It's a map. Neurobiology, culture, stoicism, digital detox. These are all parts of one system. Your brain isn't an enemy. It's trying. It screams in pain because it thinks. Loneliness ilks death. But you're not in the savannah. You're in Brooklyn. And the rules have changed. Solitude isn't failure. It's an interface. Through it, you reprogram your internal dialogue. From a critic to an ally. From a judge to a friend. And then the brain's default mode network, the one that used to spin rumination like a scratched record, starts connecting the dots. Ideas are born. Clarity returns. What we called an inner community appears. Not emptiness. Presence. Image. Mark on a park bench. Wind touches his hair. Phone. In his pocket. Not vibrating. Not calling. He doesn't look at passers-by. Doesn't think about how he looks. Doesn't compare his life to someone else's feed. He just breathes. The sun warms his skin. Leaves rustle like old pages. Children laugh somewhere. A sound, not content. And in this moment, he isn't looking for himself. He is already here. Whole. Not because everything is perfect, but because he stopped fighting himself. His inner voice now says, "You are enough." Not for achievements, not for likes, simply for being. And you? When was the last time you were on a bench and didn't feel like you were wasting time? Here's the paradox that changes everything. Loneliness isn't the absence of others. It's the presence of yourself. And the deeper you are in that presence, the less you need external validation to feel whole. In a world where 61% of young Americans regularly feel cut off, the ability to be alone isn't withdrawal. It's the bravest form of participation. You're not abandoning the world. You're returning to it, not as a hungry beggar chasing crumbs of attention, but as someone who already has a home within. Stop. Breathe. Imagine. You're sitting. No one is calling. No one is waiting. And you're not panicking. You're not grabbing your phone. You just are. And in that being is all your strength. Now the choice is yours. Are you still afraid of loneliness? Or have you already found support in it? Write in the comments, "I'm afraid," or "I found it." Because sometimes one honest answer is the first step to true solitude. And solitude, as we now know, isn't emptiness. It's the place where you first become your own friend, and then loneliness stops being a distress signal. It becomes breath, quiet, steady, yours.